once again. Thank you all for joining us. This is Nuance, and I am Mike Scala. We'll be speaking of the controller's list of naughty businesses. With some other topics. Of course, I'm joined, as always, by Jay Carter, also known as Timid, the hip hop artist in the chair of BLM Tokyo. What's going on, Jay?
Hey, no, naughty businesses just sounds funny.
Yeah, I was thinking of how they do that with landlords. And I believe that's what they sometimes call it, the list of naughty landlords. So it seems in that vein.
Yeah, okay. All
But you're
right.
right. When you add in the word business, now you're talking about naughty business. Like, well, what naughty business, right?
Right, just admonish them. You can just say, you've been naughty. It's kind of funny to me.
Naughty business have you been involved in?
Right?
Yeah. But it's interesting, right? Because we're talking about, and we'll get to it more when we get to that topic, of course, but the controller, a lot of people ask, well, you're a controller, you're a public advocate. What can you really do, right? The
Right.
citywide, aside from mayor. And yeah, of course, there are limited roles that they have officially and some powers that they enjoy. But a lot of what they do is really just to use their platform to inform the public on what's going on, right? And so this is one of those areas where the controller compiles this data and puts it out to the people.
Right. Yeah. And again, I guess we'll talk about it. But yeah, I think a lot of people are not sure what a controller really does, what their
Right.
responsibilities are as well. So,
As we
uh,
were speaking, see, this is what I mentioned this before. People always wait until we're live on Nuance to start messaging me. I don't know if they want to hear the ding, ding, ding. What's going on, David? If you hear the ding, 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 I'm getting a message right now. It's David. Quote scripture. Ever quote scripture?
say what?
Quote scriptures. Have you forgotten our man quote? This is the guy we were talking about doing a tour with way back in the day.
Um, How does it sound? That sounds familiar.
Yeah, it was going to be him, us, and Akir.
Ah, okay, okay. Yeah, I got you. I got you. I wonder what happened. What's up with Akir? It's been
Yeah. So anyway, I just got a message from quote, and I was telling him, I reached out to him earlier talking about the new single, and he's like, "Oh, I've heard it, sir, not once but twice." So I guess that's good. Congrats on the single.
like now I'm not behind. You're behind that you thought I didn't hear it by now.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So speaking of the single, here's a shirt. Bring Raucous back. As you can see, we're gonna do
Yes.
a TikTok as soon as we finish the live stream here. Nuance. I'm going to shoot a TikTok. There's going to be a giveaway, and so over the next week, I'm going to have people commenting on my TikTok, and I'm going to choose a random commenter to give a free shirt to. So
Nice.
are available if you want to cop them yourself. They're available on Bonfire. We can put a link down below or whatever we do to link things up after the show. But yeah, the shirts are, and it's nice. It's really nice. Obviously, it's the same as the album artwork, but it doesn't have the artist name on it. So it's just a message, bring Raucous back, right? Which I think resonates with hip hop heads.
True, true.
So
That's what's up.
yeah,
Yeah, it looks good.
yeah, it came out really nice. So what's going on with you?
Been doing some consulting lately, working with someone actually meeting up tomorrow to shoot some content for them. They're putting together an online course and I'm walking them through the steps on how to do that and shoot the content and whatnot. So that's kind of been what's going on this on the side.
Okay, okay, yeah, contact is king these days.
Yeah, yeah,
Hopefully they're batch recording, right? That seems to be the way to. We talked about this. If you want to stop yourself from getting too burned out, you record a lot at one time, and then you can release it incrementally throughout the months or the year or whatever.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny. I was doing some batch recording a couple of days ago and I did 7 videos.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was like, okay, I'm done for the day. Got 7 done. And then I went back to check the videos and realized that my microphone wasn't on.
Oh man.
So it was like an hour hours worth of work and no sound.
But when you redo it, sometimes it's easier than you think it's going to be, right? I find that
Yeah.
if you're writing something, have you had this happen? If you're writing a whole long thing and then the computer crashes or it doesn't save or whatever, and you lose everything you just wrote, and you're like, oh man, it took me like 3 hours to write this. And it's just terrible. But then when you go back to redo it, it's like still in your memory, kind of still in the RAM, I guess, of your own personal computer. So it comes back really quickly.
Mm.
Have you had that experience? Like if you go to redo it the second time, it's really not. It's kind of like going through the motions because you just did it already. You did the heavy lifting already.
Right. I kind of feel in that case, I feel more like, this is a pain in the butt because I've already done it.
Mm-hmm.
And so like it's more of a burden to do it again.
Yeah. I don't know. For me, I guess I get psyched up about the idea that I spent all this time and effort on it, and now if I got to do it all over again, that's crazy. But then when I
Yeah.
actually do it the second time, it's not as bad as I think it's going to be because in my head, I'm just dreading it so much.
Mm, mm, mm.
And then just kind of, I find that especially when it comes to writing, like if like even if it's a legal argument or something, I just killed myself trying to find the perfect wording of it or something like that. And if something happens where I lose it, like I said, the computer crashes or whatever. If I have to go back, it just comes a lot quicker. Even if it's, here's an example:
Well, hopefully.
a long social media post, right?
Right.
You write like 3 paragraphs, long paragraphs, and you're thinking, oh, it was worded so perfectly. How am I? But then when you kind of sit down and start doing it, it comes out word for word exactly how it was before without much effort. It's kind of weird.
Yeah, well, hopefully you've got, like you said, it's in your memory banks.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So,
All right, I wanted to mention here before we moved on to our major topics, the Stacey Amato re-election campaign office is officially open. It's on 90-15 Rockaway Beach Boulevard, and they are, of course, looking for volunteers. The field program has begun, so if you want to knock on doors, do phone calls, whatever it is to help with the re-election campaign, by all means, please contact the office, 90-15 Rockaway Beach Boulevard. We could use more people. We had a great launch today, so thank you for everyone who was out there working on this. Election Day will be here before you know it.
yeah. So what's
Yeah.
up? Yeah, it's time is moving. We got what, 2 months?
Yeah, it's September already, right? And here's the crazy thing with early voting now, it's not like it used to be where the election only happened on election day, right? I mean, in some places nationally, they're starting to vote already. Like
Mm,
this month, they're already starting to mail ballots in. And so
mm,
it really is now, like this is really the crunch time for this.
right. So,
Just again,
yeah.
more messages because you
Yeah.
have to wait. You have to wait until the 7 o'clock hour on a Tuesday to send the stuff to me. It's all good.
Remember,
It's just like
you
one
can
of
mute
those
the
things. It's
tab.
Murphy's law. It's Murphy's law. Right? It's like now is the one time where, but it's my fault because I don't mute the browser. So I probably should be doing that.
Yeah, you can mute the tab. Um,
So all right, we've got a lot to talk about. There was something about a Chinese operative. I want to get into this a little bit. It just broke today. I was looking at some of the articles about it earlier. We've got someone who was working in the state. I guess it was an aide for Cuomo and then even Kathy Hochul, governor of New York. I believe in the Department of Labor most recently. They're saying that she is being indicted along with her husband for working with the Chinese government. It seems like, according to the indictment, the husband had business in China and he was uh, given business allegedly by China to the tune of millions of dollars. They're talking about a condo in Hawaii, I believe, and a multi-million-dollar house in Long Island, and a 2024 Ferrari, and all these expensive purchases that this couple was able to make, allegedly because she was working on the inside of New York state government and aiding China, right? And in return, I guess the Chinese government allegedly provided gifts to her and business to her husband, which was quite lucrative, according to all this. So, kind of a concerning situation, right? That you had someone
yeah.
allegedly working at high levels of New York's government, who was an agent of the Chinese government. And again, this is all alleged because this is an indictment, right? This
Right.
just came down, so this hasn't been proven in court or anything yet. So we want to make that clear. But just the fact that this is being talked about, right? That this indictment was made and these allegations are out there, is pretty heavy. It's pretty heavy. Apparently, she worked to stop officials in New York, such as the governor, from meeting with Taiwanese officials, I believe officials from Taipei, they said, on
Right.
behalf of the Chinese government.
Yeah, because China has their thing against Taiwan not being
Right.
uh an independent country, but being a rebel state of their country.
Yeah.
And it's a little off topic, but that's always kind of it's always kind of been strange to me how the rest of the world goes along with that idea, like sits in that limbo of we don't really agree, but we're going to not say it or whatnot. You know, they won't acknowledge Taiwan, even though Taiwan's been a country for how many decades now.
Yeah.
And
It seems
and
like one of those things where they just kind of want to leave it alone for the purpose of not causing any controversy or drama over it. So they just kind of
yeah,
with it. They just figure like it's not a battle worth fighting. That's the sense I get from it. Like a lot of people just think, what's the point?
or just like, it's about appeasing China, not wanting to upset China. It's like why?
Mm,
Now of course, China is I could see not see, but there might be more of an argument now because China is such an economic powerhouse now.
right.
But go back 20 years ago and before, and China wasn't, and yet it still had this policy of appeasing China, and it's always struck me as kind of strange in that regard.
Did you see when John Cena had to apologize for calling Taiwan a country?
Yes,
That was so awkward, wasn't it?
yes,
Yeah.
yeah. And it's kind of like the unofficial policy not to recognize it as a country or host any of their officials, but at the same time support their democracy. It's I don't know, it's a really weird thing. It's always struck me as odd.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of like walking the fence a little bit, straddling the line.
So yeah, and to get back onto this, like being able to block meetings between the governor and any officials from China, from Taiwan, the governor they would still have to go along with that block to some degree.
Right. But, who knows how it was presented. When I
That's true.
first read it, I didn't necessarily think it would have been presented as we can't meet with them because we're going to upset China. We don't want to recognize them as a country or acknowledge their existence. It might have been some, sabotage. And again, I don't know. I don't know this for a fact, but uh,
Right.
that's kind of how I read it. And I guess that was maybe an assumption, but I could see that, right? I could see if she was trying to stop the meetings from happening, because you don't want to out yourself or raise red flags, right? You don't want to be like, well, hold on, who are you to tell me the policy of New York is going to be we're not going to acknowledge Taiwan? I don't know if it was that obvious, right? It might have been a little bit more subtle than that, right? Like, we can't take this meeting for whatever. Oops, sorry, you have a conflict of interest, you have a scheduling conflict that day, or that kind of thing.
Yeah, imagining there's probably also some kind of conversation that takes place where, I mean, New York, especially New York City, has a pretty large population of people from China. Not just that were, not people that were born there that have, family in China, but people that have immigrated to the US and live there, especially with Chinatown, how big it is. And so maybe there's a conversation there, like we don't want to upset or alienate some of, our residents
Right.
here by these types of things because of that politics or whatnot.
It could be.
I'm sure there's a variety of things how it came about, but
It could be. I mean, I don't know. I'll have to read more into exactly what her role was in the administration.
Right.
because obviously now the governors Cuomo and Hochul are trying to distance themselves from her and say, we don't, we really didn't have much to do with her. She wasn't very high level, whatever. So they're doing that probably because they don't want to get that heat on them. But
Right.
if it's
Well,
true,
according
if it's true that she really didn't have too much autonomy, especially not able to set policy, right? Who would she be to go to them and say you can't meet with these officials from this other country because it's going to upset China? I mean, that wouldn't be her role to say that. You know what I mean?
But in that article, that ABC News article, it said that the prosecutors said that she, at the request of Chinese officials, blocked representatives of the Taiwanese government from having access to high-level officials in New York State,
Mm-hmm.
altered state governmental messaging on issues related to the Chinese government, and attempted to facilitate a trip to China for a high-level politician in New York, among other things.
So altered messaging, and that phrase is a little vague. Also, what does that mean? Does it mean that
Right.
she was in a room convincing them to change it, or did she kind of sneak in and log into the
Right.
computer and change messaging when they weren't looking?
Right. Right.
So
So I'm sure it's going to all come out in court with their more specifics, but
right,
it does, like you said at the beginning, it does kind of raise some concerns about having these types of operatives or people that loyal to a foreign government in such high positions.
it's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, and now that you just said that, it reminds me of that topic we had not long ago on Nuance about spying on rival campaigns, right? Obviously,
Mm,
not the same thing, but of a similar nature, right? You're holding yourself out to be loyal, or someone who's trying to work for one person, but really you're trying to benefit a different party altogether. And in this case,
right.
a rival in many ways.
Right. Yeah. I wonder what kind of, if any kind of background research or vetting is done for people. I mean, I'm not sure what her position was, but to
Right.
have this kind of access to, I guess that she was an aide.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
wonder what,
and it's also funny in a sense that when we hear these words, right, spies or foreign operatives or whatever, I think our tendency is to reduce it to something you would see in a movie, right?
right,
Make it so overly dramatic, and she's a double agent and all that kind of stuff. But there could be some nuance in there. It could be not something that's even detectable by a background search. It could be some,
right.
she could just be a regular person going on living her life and going to school here and getting jobs here and working in government. There'll be no reason necessarily to think anything was wrong until the
Right.
activity started to occur. Right now, maybe there might have been something to find with her husband's business interest in China, and I don't know how long that was going on. I mean, that could have been something that would have raised suspicions. I don't know, but
And should that have raised suspicions?
generally speaking, you may not be able to detect that, right? I mean, they could be
Right.
living their life as a regular person with no red flags.
Right. Should his connections or business interests in China, which is generally I don't know, a somewhat hostile government to the United
Mm-hmm.
States, should that have been cause for concern or further scrutiny?
Yeah, I think it depends on what the nature of the business was and a lot
But
of
just,
factors, you know.
yeah,
But probably, I mean, it's probably worth looking at least, right? But then it's also her husband's business. So, I'm trying to think from the perspective of someone who's worked in government before. Now, I'm not married, but I don't really know how closely your spouse gets scrutinized when you go for a job.
mm.
You know what I mean? Um, are they going to run background checks on your whole family? Probably not.
But we're talking about national security. We're talking about high level government
Yeah.
positions here. Now, according to the article, a spokesman for Cuomo said that she had little to no interaction with the governor. She was a low-level community liaison.
Mhm.
However, when she, I guess, got to Hochul's administration, she was promoted to deputy chief of staff.
And we said, was she running the Department of Labor? Was she considered high up in the department most recently? I know they said she was fired last year.
I don't see that. They said that she was hired by the executive chamber more than a decade ago. They terminated her employment in March 2023 after discovering this evidence of misconduct. Um,
That's another question. I saw that also, and they're keeping that vague too. Discovering evidence of misconduct, but was it related
right.
to this? And if so, was that not reported earlier, or
Right.
was it reported and that's why the indictment came down? But then it took what, a year and a half for that to happen? I mean, it does raise a question for me. If you
Right.
discover this, why not say anything?
Right. Um, so it looks like, at least from the statement, for when working with Cuomo's administration, she wasn't really in that big of a position. She was, it said she was one of many community liaisons.
Yeah,
But for Hochul's administration, she was her deputy chief of staff. Or yeah.
yeah.
So that's
But you
that's
also don't know. I mean, obviously, deputy chief of staff is pretty high, but you don't know for the Cuomo, for example, really what the relationship was because they're
right.
going to try to
Sure.
make it seem like she was a nobody because they don't want anyone to think that they were involved in it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So
So,
obviously they have a stake in this, right? You got to take that
right.
into consideration when you look at their statements.
Right. Absolutely. So, yeah, this will definitely have to come out in court to see how extensive it was. But it is, it is concerning to say the least that, and not just that
Yeah.
the Chinese government, but for any foreign government to have someone influencing
Right.
um,
Right.
American politicians on behalf of or to the benefit of these foreign governments.
And how, right? That's also what I would be curious to know. And that's probably useful in terms of guiding your policy or your procedures going forward, right? How
Right.
did this happen? Was it through the husband's business? I'm really curious to know
Right.
what the origin of all this was. How did the Chinese government even get in touch to say, we want you doing this?
Right.
You know?
So, yeah, we have to figure that out. So I don't think
Yeah.
any of them should be, influenced by foreign governments. I mean,
Right.
Israel's another one. There's a lot of influence
Yeah.
from
And
that foreign government.
right. And when we think of foreign countries, we tend to think of the federal government, right? In the US.
Right.
I think
Right.
it's a good reminder that state governments can be involved as well,
Yeah.
especially if you take something like New York, right? I kind of learned this. I mean, of course, you know it intuitively, but you don't really appreciate the scope and the extent of it until you get there, right? Working in Albany, you start to see, all right, you think that this is a state level job and is going to be working on state law, but it's New York. It's where, for example, JFK Airport is, where a lot of the ports are.
One of the major financial hubs for the world.
Right. Wall Street, big economic driver of the whole country and the whole world. And so there is foreign interest involved in this. And you start
Yeah.
to look at the history of the New York state government working to end apartheid, for example, in South Africa when that was going on and throughout the
Right.
years. I mean, just because it's state government doesn't mean that there's no interaction or
Right.
relevance to foreign powers. There certainly is, right?
Or no interest from foreign powers to have some kind of a hand,
Right. Right.
in the dealings going on there.
Yeah, think about that, right? So now you're talking about allegedly China saying we want to get involved not just in what goes on in DC, but we don't even want the governor of New York or New York state officials meeting with these Taiwanese officials, right? So
Right.
that's really meddling at a deep level.
Right. Absolutely. So,
And then if that's going on, you just question about where else is it happening? What other states or to what extent is it happening in DC? Because if they're going to go to that extent in New York, how far are they willing to go in Washington?
right. Absolutely. So this will have to come out in court.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
we'll see. So far it's the kind of light on information. So yeah.
Right, right. Yeah, this just broke today.
Yeah.
Um,
All right.
yeah, we'll have to keep an eye on it like there's other things. And like we said, this is all alleged right now, right? This is just what the indictment is saying, but
Right.
something to keep an eye on. Speaking of keeping an eye on things, we had a poll last week and I heard that the results went kind of hard.
Yes, we had a poll last week. the poll last week was based on a poll that came out that was done by a marketing organization, and one of the questions they asked were whether or not Arabic numerals should be taught in American schools, and 56% of the respondents said no. And the surprising part of this, to me at least, not one just that 72% of the Republican respondents said no, but also 40% of the Democratic respondents said no. So that kind of surprised me. But also that people just didn't seem to realize that the numbers that we use are Arabic numerals. So our poll question was, were you taught in school that the numbers we use are Arabic numerals? And this seemed to generate some interest because we had over 300 responses,
Okay.
300 votes on this poll. Now, you said you weren't taught that in school. I said it was taught in school. I learned it in school.
Hmm.
So what do you think? Just your guess on the yes no's here. So I put yes, no, and I don't remember.
Okay. I think it may have a lot to do with age, maybe geographic region as well, because people outside of New York are answering these polls sometimes. If I had to guess, I would try to, I guess, think about what the demographic breakdown might be and be guided by that. I would say with the three choices, this is interesting. I would say the no and the I don't remember would edge out the yes. Maybe 40, nah, 35% yes would be my guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. You are way off. 87% said yes, they were
Wow.
taught this in school. 5% said no, 8% said I don't remember.
See, I'm calling lie on that. I don't,
It
I
was
think,
taught
yeah, I
in
don't think they were really
school.
taught that. You know what I think? I think that they're saying that because of their ideological leanings.
No, no. I
Uh,
think you're a part of the I don't remember crowd, and you're saying no, but you don't really remember that it was introduced as these were Arabic numerals.
I think it's the opposite, though. I think people saying yes had heard about this going on because this was a new thing.
87% are saying yes because they're misremembering.
Yeah, either they're misremembering or they want that to be the case, right? So it's like they're
Nah,
pushing that into their consciousness. I think that's
nah.
what it is. It's almost like a Mandela effect type deal because this is a very politically charged question. Let's be honest about that. And this also isn't the first time this has
But
come
it
up, right?
shouldn't be.
This
It
keeps coming
shouldn't
up
be.
over the years, year after year. You see this. So I think it's gotten to this point where left leaning people, most Democrats, and we said surprisingly not all, but people who are more on the left tend to think of it as, of course, we should learn Arabic numerals because those are the regular numerals, and we should all know that the U.S. and English, for example, and all of the things that we do takes borrows from the Arabic, and let's not otherize it, right? So it became so political that not everyone is going to remember what they learned about in school as you get older, but you learn about when you were 6 years,
Sure.
5 years old, right? But you want that to be the case because you want to call people idiots who are saying that you shouldn't teach it.
No, I think this is as common. This should be as common knowledge, as common sense as knowing that English has a Latin base.
Mm-hmm. Here's an
That's
interesting question. All right, so similar, right? Related to that, do you think most people would acknowledge that English borrows from Arabic?
probably not.
Yeah. And I did learn that. I have a distinct recollection of learning that in school, that English
We
comes
probably wouldn't
from
know that. Right.
Greek, Latin, Arabic, and there might be
French.
a couple.
French is a big one.
Yeah, yeah. Some French. Although with the French, a lot of the words simply just are French words, right? We say fiance, for example, but it's just a French word.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think I don't think people would know as many would know that there's Arabic influence in the language, but the numbers they should know this. Now, let's there's nuance. We're gonna look at different angles as well. Someone one of the comments says, Perhaps some folks younger than I were taught," and this was repeated a couple times in the comments, "were taught it as base 10 numbers.
Hmm.
But I, a child of the 50s and 60s, was certainly taught they were Arabic numerals. Of
That's, I
course,
think, yeah, yeah.
I was also taught Roman numerals, which
Right.
apparently are a complete mystery to my grandchildren."
Hmm. Okay, and that's why I think it does have a lot to do with the age demographics, and maybe this is an
Hmm.
older crowd who answered this poll. I don't know, but if you went to school in the 50s and 60s and maybe 70s, I think you were more likely to be taught these Arabic numerals than if you went to school in the 90s and certainly after the 90s. I don't think that's really part of what they teach kids. I mean, I could be wrong. I'm not an expert on what they're teaching kids in every jurisdiction in the country, right? But
Right.
my sense of this is that that's not
Now,
something that's really taught. Roman numerals, yes, we were taught Roman numerals.
right.
Yeah,
And it would have probably been around the same time. These are Roman numerals, these are Arabic numerals, the numbers we use. It wasn't like there was like a full semester on the history of Arabic numerals and stuff. It was like, well, this is what we call these.
yeah, but
They're
no,
Arabic numerals.
and it's funny. Like I'm saying no, so convinced. Obviously, it's possible that when I was 5 years old, at one point in time, a teacher mentioned that they were Arabic numerals, but I don't have a recollection of that. I do recall we're gonna learn our ABCs and one, two, threes. You know what I mean? I don't remember them saying these are the Arabic numerals, guys. I don't remember that ever coming
Yeah.
in. Yeah,
I just
remember
think,
base 10
yeah.
numbers also, but that was more when you went into junior high school, and they were teaching the different bases. So it wasn't like you're in first grade, they're teaching you the base 10 because you're like, the hell's base 10? But when you start learning about binary, zeros and ones, or
Right.
base two, then they tell you, by the way, the numbers you've been using all your life, those are base 10.
Right. And I think those, yeah, that would have been taught a little bit later because we did
Right.
learn and I think some of that also was reinforced, at least for me, in computer classes, because that's where, you learn base 10, you learn counting in base 2. Um so that would have been something that's like an aside, right? Like it's not something you go deep into because it's just more like this is just more information about it.
Right. Right.
So, um, yeah, it's so listen, 72% said they were taught this in school.
Wow.
So,
I'd love to know more about the age breakdown, right? If you said yes, how old are you? If you don't mind asking, what year was this taught to you?
now my another part of this was, of course, the people conducting the survey purposely didn't give any extra information to kind of see if there was a prejudice aspect to this. And so to me, it was surprising at such a high level of Democrats that said no. But that would also indicate possible prejudice, but also ignorance that the numbers we use are Arabic numerals. So one of the comments was saying stupidity isn't exclusive to Republicans, nor is bigotry, which is a good point because a lot of times we in discourse the way that we conduct the discourse is more like they are exclusively the bad guys and these are exclusively the good guys, but we know there is a blending of ideologies. Not everyone is completely 100% this way of thinking or completely 100% that way of thinking.
Yeah, well, you get the bigotry, I think, in the response to the question, not only in people saying no who just don't know, but if it's emotionally charged, like, oh, hell no, you shouldn't teach that to my kid, right? Then
Right.
you start to get a sense of hate, in
Mhm.
tone. But there are a lot of people who just don't know.
Right. Now, some people were commenting. Um, One person said they were born in 59 and was definitely taught in school that we used Arabic numbers. Um, and they used Roman numerals, but one person said they were taught in the late 60s that they were Hindu Arabic numerals, which is another way of describing them because it's kind of where they originated before. So someone said we were taught this back in the 70s. So some of it seems like there's a number of people that were older
Right,
and
right.
yeah,
Yeah, so get someone who's younger. That's what I'm really curious about. Maybe we can find someone as a guest for Nuance who is Gen Z, right? And we could ask questions like this because they might have a better recollection of what they learned in school. It wasn't as long ago for them,
Yeah. So,
you know. And now what you see also is people complaining about the new math, meaning Common Core, but a lot of it isn't even really new math. I think a lot of it is adults forgetting or just not being very good at math. When you see these Facebook arguments,
so yeah, and then here's a comment here saying we used Arabic numerals as the terminology back when I was in school, but when my daughter went through K through 12 in the 2000s, they used base 10 terminology.
hmm, okay,
So they could see Arabic numerals being unfamiliar terminology for many.
right, right.
No. Like I said, like I remember that it was being taught. And there was not this visceral reaction to the term Arabic.
Oh, because it was
You know,
pre
it's
nine
just like,
eleven.
oh, that's just what it is.
It was pre nine
Um,
eleven. That's why.
Pre 9/11, I think, yeah, 9/11 had a lot to do with it. Pre 9/11, pre the fear mongering that happened after
Sure,
9/11 that was
absolutely.
widespread. So it was just like, okay, yeah, the Arabic numerals, okay. And, you know, so,
Right.
so
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
very
But I'm in
interesting.
that weird period right before 9/11 historically, right? I went to school in the 90s. And
Right,
so it wasn't like they avoided calling them Arabic numerals because of 9/11. It hadn't happened yet, right? But
right.
it still wasn't something that I think that they did at that point. So you you know, you might be careful with saying 9/11 is the reason they stopped saying Arabic numerals because I believe it happened even prior to that.
And again, it could also be, you know, maybe a regional thing, or I don't know, I don't know, not a regional thing, because I went to school in like several regions
No,
in
but
the
you're not going
country.
to tell me they call them Arabic numerals in every region you went to. They just kept saying Arabic numerals. How many times did they tell you this?
Well, I don't remember that, but it's just like I said, to me, it was just common sense, a common knowledge.
Yeah.
72%, I'm sorry, not 72, 87% um agreed with that. So
There's age in that and there's bias. I'm telling you, there's bias in that. There's bias in that. Because let's be honest, you're not going to know for certain what you were taught when you were in kindergarten or in first as you get older.
but you remember what Arabic numerals are. You remember what Roman numerals are. Like,
But why is it that I recall being taught specifically about Roman numerals? And I remember being taught about the numbers. I don't remember ever in school the teacher saying these are called Arabic numerals. I learned that later in life. And I think, you know what it is? When I learned that later in life, I was like, oh, that's what they're called. I never knew that. Right. That was like
I think I think what might be the reason why you still recall Roman numerals
mhm,
is because Roman numerals actually had to be taught
right.
as a way of a new system of counting, of reading the numbers. And so it would have been a little bit more sticky. Whereas to label it Arabic numerals, these are numbers you've been using your whole life already. And so it's like, oh, this is also called Arabic numerals. This is where they came from. And then you just move on and just keep doing like you've been doing. It's not focused on. Whereas, you
If
know,
it
Roman
was,
numerals, you had to
yeah.
sit down and actually focus on
Well,
teaching it.
and it's something also to the fact that they probably introduced Roman numerals a little bit later on. So I might have been older at that point, maybe
Could
2 or 3
be.
years older when they first started teaching kids numbers in what kindergarten. Then when if you tell a kid these are called Arabic numerals, they can be like Arabic what? What? You're a kid. You're like 2 years, 3 years old, whatever. You know what I mean? Like you're very, very, very young. It's hard enough to get them to learn one, two, three. So if you
I
say
don't think it was
Arabic
first grade.
numerals to a kindergartner, it's going to go in one ear and out the other.
Yeah, I don't think it would have been first grade or sometime around then, but
So after they started teaching the numbers, they introduced this concept of Arabic numerals to you.
I don't think it was that early. It
But
might
didn't
have
they teach
been,
the numbers though in kindergarten at first? At
yeah,
some point, they got
you
to teach
just
you what
teach the
one means
numbers.
before
You just
telling you
teach
they're
them.
Arabic. All right.
I'm thinking sometime around, I'm imagining, I don't know for certain, but I'm thinking sometime around probably like fifth grade or something like that. Fifth, sixth grade, probably. I'm
We
assuming.
got to get kids on here. I really want to know because they'll tell us more, right?
Okay, we
No,
have to
no,
see.
no, because we're just making stuff up. I mean, our memory is not exactly clear. I mean, we have obviously there's going to be holes in it. Thinking back to when we were in the first grade, right?
Right, as far as exactly when, but
Yeah,
I just know, yeah, like I said, to me it was always common.
Right. Which
But
does tell me it's very likely you were taught that in school, and it's likely that I was not.
right.
Yeah.
So it's very possible as well. So
So,
very interesting poll. Um, and a lot of responses here, over 300. So that's pretty awesome.
yeah, yeah. We like the responses.
Yeah.
Um, Speaking of pretty awesome, I guess it depends on your perspective. Let's put this out there. The
Uh-oh.
controller just announced a wall of shame. Is that what they're calling it?
A
For
wall of
private
shame.
employers who are doing unscrupulous activities, shall we say.
Mm.
And you can actually go online and look. I haven't looked at the dashboard yet, as they're calling it, but you can see which companies they're talking about here. The idea is more transparency for people who are seeking jobs or in jobs, right? They want to see what their companies are up to. Obviously, it's, I'm sure, meant to deter companies from engaging in this type of behavior because they don't want to end up on the list, right?
Mm.
But they're talking about a breakdown of health and safety violations, wage theft, prevailing wage violations, illegal anti union tactics, discrimination, and harassment. Wow. So, right off the bat, I'm wondering how do they get all of this data?
Well, it looks like the data is coming from reported violations.
Right. But reported by whom? The employees. So, for example, if they're reporting harassment, does it need to be adjudicated, or is it going to end up on this list just because they claimed someone harassed them?
I don't think it says exactly that. Um, Probably, I'm assuming that these are things that were probably reported to the labor board, um, and they use that data to,
Yeah, I mean, I just hope there would be a distinction between alleged and proven, right? I would hope a list like this would be able to break that down.
well, here's in this list here, or this article they're talking about, um, at least the companies that they're highlighting, right? So, for example, Chipotle Mexican Grill, which really hurts my heart because they have amazing food. Um, they committed the highest number of unfair labor practices in New York City in 2023, with 7 violations, primarily involving coercion, retaliation against employees attempting to unionize. But they also paid over $22 million in settlements
Mm-hmm.
with the New York City Department of Consumer and Worker Protections for failure to adhere to the Fair Work Week and paid safe and sick leave laws. So the fact that they paid out these settlements would kind of indicate that this has been gone through and, scrutinized in court and,
Well,
you know,
sure, to a certain degree, right? I mean, I'm the attorney, and so I'm looking at this really through the lens of an attorney. And I know that a settlement by itself is not an admission of guilt, right? Or
right,
culpability. So they could have settled to avoid the PR, to avoid the expensive litigation costs, for whatever. It doesn't mean that they necessarily did those things. Now, it's still useful to know unless it was a confidential settlement, which I'm assuming it wasn't, considering they were able to report on it. But if you're able to get that out there, it's still good to get that out there so people can know, you know,
right,
do what you wish
right,
with it. Again, doesn't necessarily mean liability or whatever, but sure, the settlement happened. Work there if you want, but just be aware that this was something that happened. I think
right,
that's okay. But I do want to see this data to the extent possible broken down, compartmentalized, I guess, into this has been proven. This is just an allegation. This is a violation found by this body here. This was done in court, whatever. I mean, and maybe people don't
right,
care about that, but I think that's important if you're looking
right,
out for the rights of the companies, even, right? Let's be fair.
right. No, I agree. I agree. There should be kind of categorized or labeled
Yeah,
how this played out. Allegation versus found guilty is very important, I think.
right, right.
In regards to Chipotle here, there was also in that little paragraph here saying that they were also ordered to pay over $1 million in unpaid wages as a
Right.
result of New York State Department of Labor wage theft investigation, which found they stole wages from more than 20,000 workers across 207 locations statewide.
That's
So,
crazy. And I'm really curious also about that, finding out more about that. So when they say wage theft, what
right,
exactly happened there? Are they saying workers put in the time and Chipotle refused to pay them, and why?
right. Yeah, it doesn't specify, but they do have it does link to an article that goes further into it. Um, let's see. They recovered the New York State Department of Labor recovered the unpaid wages. Um, let's see. Wow, this is kind of crazy. Just in general, apparently there's over $63 million in stolen wages for almost 65,000 workers statewide in the last 2 years.
Yeah, I'm really curious about that because obviously that's a politically charged term, right? Stolen wages. If you ask Chipotle, they're
Right.
not going to be like, "Yeah, we stole their money." They're going to have their own reasons, and so that's something that they can fight over. But I'm really curious to know what the story is there and how are they trying to justify it. Usually, when you hear the term wage theft, you hear it in the context of employers telling the employees they're stealing money, right? Based on punch clock violations or whatever.
Uh-huh.
That's usually how I hear the term, and I think it's kind of bogus when they do that. It's one of the reasons why I don't like the idea of being an employee. But I get people got to do what they got to do. But you see signs. I've seen this, for example, posted up online, right? A sign maybe in the break room or by the punch clock. Is that what they call that? Where you got to punch in,
Right.
saying that it's wage theft if you go to the bathroom without punching out, things like that.
Right.
And I'm like, oh my god,
Right.
you're really that crazy? You're micromanaging or you're scrutinizing that carefully. So you can't even use the bathroom without having to clock in and clock out, and then of course they're tracking your time by doing that too, and that your movements, right?
Right.
So that sits the wrong way. I don't like how that feels. But that's
Right.
usually where I see the term wage theft. The company is alleging the employee is stealing their money
Right.
by
Well,
staying on top when they're not working.
according to this article, this article that was linked to it, here's what they found in regards to Chipotle was that in regards to wage theft, wage issues related to the correct minimum wage rate for fast food workers, which is higher than regular minimum wage.
Mm,
So that would seem to indicate that maybe they were being paid less than what they should have been paid
gotcha.
as being fast food workers. And another issue was wage issues for spread of hours pay, which requires employees to pay additional time to workers whose shift spans more than 10 hours in any one day. I think they made a mistake here. It requires employers to pay additional time to workers. So that type of wage theft,
It seems like maybe what's going on here is Chipotle is saying that they're not fast food; they're just a great restaurant,
that could be one of their defenses.
right? It's like we're exempt from the fast food regulations because we don't do fast food; we do good food fast. I can see that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So apparently, if you feel you've been a victim of wage theft, you can file complaints by visiting the Department of Labor for New York, which is where I would assume this is where they get the data for this. Um, what is this for this wall of shame?
All right, so let's go through the list a little bit here because I see other companies on here. These are
Yeah,
companies that the comptroller of New York City, right, Brad Lander, has on his wall of shame. So if you disagree, take it up with Brad. But we got Chipotle, Chipotle Mexican Grill is the first one we see on here, according to this article, at least from documentedny.com.
right.
Planned companies. I never heard of this. This company provides building, janitorial, maintenance, security, and concierge services. It has
That's
the
a
highest,
wide range there, like
yeah,
janitorial and concierge services.
hello. But had the highest number of ULPs. What's ULP in New York City?
That's unfair labor practices.
There you go. Okay. We've got
They had
Fadmo.
OSHA violations as well.
Yeah, I see that. Fadmo Home Healthcare Services Agency, a Staten Island based company, was the largest wage theft offender investigated by the U.S. Department of Labor. Okay.
Wow, look at that they owed over $1.45 million to 22 workers.
Yeah, and
That's not a small amount of money.
per worker, right? Let's do the math on that. I was just gonna.
I'm doing the exact same. I'm doing the math right now. That's $65,909 per worker.
Wow.
That's not a small thing at
No.
all. I'd be very upset. That'd be very
Smile,
upset.
Smile Home Care Agency, also known as Smile Care.
Mm,
Timeless Roofing. Okay. Also, you got OSHA violations here.
hmm
Amazon. Okay, that's not too surprising.
That's definitely not surprising at all.
Panda
They've been
Express. Oh, okay, that's interesting. The ubiquitous mall chain had the largest fair work week and paid safe sick leave law settlement in
mm,
2023, paying $3.45 million in restitution and civil penalties, which impacted over 1,400 workers. So the other thing is, you wonder if after settling, such a high profile matter, right, for such a large amount of money, some of these
mm.
companies might change their practices. I mean, I'm sure Panda Express, for example, doesn't want another settlement for $3.45 million. So maybe going forward, they won't do things that way anymore.
Yeah, you have to wonder.
Yeah,
So that one is about $2,400 per worker.
not a small amount of money.
I'm sorry?
That's not a small amount of money. That's significant.
It is, yeah, especially for a worker working at Panda Express where this is not a particularly high paying job. Um, so that $2,400 could be, life changing, life saving.
Right. Uber and Lyft are both on here. Okay, I wonder if they had similar type issues. It says Uber failed to provide drivers with paid safe and sick leave as required by city and state law.
Right. And I wonder if that um because there was that dispute for a long time with companies like Uber and Lyft. Were these people employees of the company or were they independent contractors? Now, if they're independent contractors, then the company doesn't have to provide the safe and sick leave because they set their own schedule, right? They can take
Right,
whenever they
right.
want.
Obviously, the dispute is that a lot of companies want to classify their workers as independent contractors, but
Right.
they really fall more in line with the definition of employee,
Right.
especially when they control a lot of what that worker does, right? The time and the manner. Now, when it comes to rideshare, I think their argument is that the worker is in control of their own schedule, at least, right? And so
Right.
they have more time there. But there are a number of factors that you would look at.
Right.
Yeah, this is often a point of contention, right?
But there's
Obviously, the companies want to classify you as an independent contractor because it's fewer obligations for them.
Right. But there's apparently been some kind of a court happening because Uber was ordered to pay 290 million for illegally deducting earnings from drivers.
Right.
And that was after settling with
Yeah.
the Attorney General. So I you would assume that the amount should have been much higher. And then Lyft
Also,
settled with the Attorney General for 38 million.
right. Right. So Uber settled for 290 million, Lyft for 38 million, but similar type wage
Right.
hour violations alleged, right?
Illegally deducting earnings from drivers.
And failing to provide paid sick leave.
Now I can see the dispute with
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
providing paid sick leave, right?
Right.
Because again, that's that employee versus
Sure.
independent contract argument. But illegally deducting earnings from drivers would seem more cut and dry. Like you shouldn't be taking this money regardless. Like, you
Yeah.
know,
Unless that also somehow stems from that distinction.
right, right. So, and Gucci is on this list.
Yeah. Gucci,
Um,
the Italian luxury brand, settled a sexual harassment case for $330,000. One of the agencies, this is the New York City Commission on Human Rights, one of their largest monetary settlements of last year. Gucci was also required to provide anti-discrimination training to all employees, revise their gender-based discrimination policy, undergo monitoring, and display notice of rights posters in all the stores and corporate offices.
right. So I personally, I think I think this is a good list to publish. Um,
Yeah.
if like you were saying, there is the distinctions of if it's just alleged or if these are actual things that have been settled. Um, that needs to be on there. But I think people should, if the data is there, if you've got the data there, I think
Mhm.
it's good for transparency for the public.
I agree. I hope it doesn't lead to people getting more disenfranchised or frustrated, cynical. People who are looking for work and maybe having a hard time finding the right job for them, seeing a list like this and just think, oh man, like even if I get a job, they're gonna rob me. They're gonna do, all these things can happen. What's the point? I hope it doesn't depress people.
Well, I think, I think that's a possibility, but needing a job will overrule that, I think. And
Well, what if those are your
also,
only options, though? I mean, like I don't know. I'm just trying to think through scenarios here, right? Like you really
right,
need a job. You go to the mall, you get a job at Panda Express, and then you read a list like this, and it says they're gonna steal your wages or whatever. And you're thinking, oh man, like it's a catch-22, right? Like even if I get a job,
right.
I'm screwed.
But I think on the flip side, it also shows that there's potential restitution for these type of violations, that somebody's watching and
Right.
that you have an outlet to report these violations.
That is true.
So
That is
I
true.
think that's a positive. The one job on this list that I would absolutely take pause at joining the company would be Amazon, because even according to this article, they are notorious for either overworking their employees or being anti-union. So I would, yeah, it wouldn't be from
Yeah,
this. It's from all the news reports that would be something that would deter me.
I don't know if I'd want to sign up for Gucci's sexual harassment program either.
No, probably not. You know, Probably not. It looks like they were also required to provide anti-discrimination training, revise their gender-based discrimination policy,
Right.
undergo monitoring, and display notice of rights. So they had, yeah, some other issues, some human rights types of violations that they had to deal with.
Yeah, we talked about how even law firms now, when you work for them, they'll give you anti-harassment training.
Right. Yeah.
It's not a
So
bad thing, although some of the
it's
stuff
not,
on there makes you go, "Wow, I can't believe they have to teach me." It's just like a sad state of affairs when they have to tell you this is harassment, and like that's something that you should go back to kindergarten if you don't know.
but we also gotta look at how what has been commonplace in the business world for
Yeah,
generations.
sure. That's what makes it sad, right? The fact that they actually have to give you a course on this is
Right.
indicative of people, I guess, not knowing or just doing it anyway, right? It's like this
Right.
behavior is happening in the workplace to the point of having to actually teach everyone who comes in this is unacceptable. It's like, wow, it
Right.
got to that point that, it was that pervasive in the workplace
Yeah.
that you need a course about, this very basic humanity. That's pretty sad.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. So,
Yeah.
so I think we were gonna make the poll question around this, right?
Yeah, yeah, about if people agree that lists like these should be published. And I would imagine people would say yes to this, generally speaking, right? But we'll see. It's always nice to get people's thoughts on it. So
Yes.
the poll question of the week is: should local governments publish lists of unscrupulous activities by private employers?
Yeah. And I, for one, I think this is a great list to publish.
I agree. I agree. We've talked about pushes to get state and local governments to publish more data, to be more transparent, right? Because that, in theory, leads to more accountability and can
Right.
deter such.
And change.
Right, right, absolutely. Education, like you said, you come out with this wall of shame, and maybe it's a catchy name, right? Create some buzz, create some hype. People talk about it, people send the links around, whatever. But then you start looking at it, and you start maybe diving into it, and you see, oh, the Department of Labor, and all these different bodies that got involved, and maybe now it's educational, and people learn about these different oversight agencies, and maybe ways to report something, or maybe even they learn that things are illegal or against regulation that they might not have even known, right? They're seeing wage theft. Chipotle allegedly stealing wages. What does that mean? Is my company doing that? You start looking into these things, and it's a way to
Right.
hold people's feet to the fire.
Right. Right. And yeah, I mean we definitely need to have that.
Yeah,
So things can be fair across the board for workers, and so employers can be held accountable for violating certain
right.
things.
Yeah, it reminds me in a way of that bill that we pushed through, which is now a New York law about the state of origin database for guns, right? More
Mm,
transparency, right? Just putting that data out there. If this data is available, right, especially if the government is compiling it, but even if it's just able to be compiled, why not show it to the public so that they can learn from it? And maybe it has an effect on behavior, right? Maybe it's
right.
as a deterrent, maybe it does something, but more transparency tends to be good, right? Shining a light on these issues is a
Right.
good way to move the ball, I think.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
You know,
The
and
one
then
thing,
get to a point where you can have that honest conversation. But we've talked about that a lot, I think, on this show, right? That
right.
we have all these issues, everyone's always fighting and yelling past each other on these things, but it becomes almost impossible when you can't start from a place of fact, right? When you can't agree that this is the data, these are the facts. Now we can debate our opinions and our values and our thoughts and whatever. But let's start from we can all agree this is what's happening, guys, right? This is what it is, you know. So
Right.
I think this is a way of doing that.
The one thing about this article, and then before we wrap up here, that does annoy me is that there's no link to the actual wall of shame, so
Mm,
people can go and see the data themselves.
right.
And that's to me is a failure. I understand from uh, uh you know engagement or not engagement, but a point of view of the site wanting to keep traffic on their site, but it just makes it more valuable when you can get to the actual source.
Yeah. Or sometimes, like I said, sometimes you'll be reading an article and one word will be hyperlinked in the article, and that's the link you want, but it's not easy to find that word or guess what that word
Right,
could be, right? And I
right,
do that on purpose sometimes, but it's really annoying. I find that in particular, when I'm trying to find a court case. You find an article about the case, and like, the Supreme Court just decided X, Y, and Z, and then you scroll through the article trying to find out where is the link to the actual opinion, and sometimes it's there but in a place you don't expect it to be, right? Like five
right,
paragraphs in, the word decided is linked, and that's the opinion, something weird like that.
right. So, yeah. I mean, there's a ton of links in this article.
Yeah, I was gonna say that too, right? Like earnings from drivers, when on the Uber paragraph is linked, where does that
Yeah.
lead if you click it? Okay, it's
Yeah, there
another
are a ton of
article
links.
on their site. Are these all articles on their own site?
Not all of them. Some of them go
Okay,
to
yeah, I see that. Oh, I see it.
news
Some goes to
articles.
nyc.gov. Okay, yeah.
But it's just this dashboard that the whole article is about is the only link that seems to be missing, which
Maybe
is kind of strange to me.
we Google that.
I
Controller.
found it. I put it in the chat.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. It's very easy to find. Just type in um, what did I put in there? Employer violations dashboard. For me, it came up as the first result in Google, and it's laid out pretty easy to understand. Comes with the intro and then a description of the violations, and then the wall of shame. So it's not just the wall of shame. It looks like there's some other groups as well. Workplace safety. They've got it broken down in categories. So you go to violations and you can see some violators for workplace safety, some violators for wage theft, unfair labor practices, discrimination. So it's a wealth of information here, and there's an employer search.
Okay.
So yeah, you can
See
check
if
your
your
employer
employer,
out.
respective employer, is on that list, huh?
Yeah. Let's see if Scala's on there.
Oh my goodness.
Nope. Nope, not on the list. So so I think it's a good thing.
Yeah, no, I think so too. Like I said, my concerns would be just make sure that it's accurate and not creating a false depiction of certain companies where maybe some allegations were made, but nothing has yet been proven, or at least make a distinction, right?
Right.
Make that
Yeah.
distinction. So
So,
yeah.
all right.
So the link I just pulled up here. You said did you post that in the chat or
I post
bonfire.com slash
I
store?
posted all of those. I
Okay,
posted this article, I posted the dashboard, the Wall of Shame article, and the bonfire links in the chat.
nice. So you're ahead of things. And
Staying on it, man.
yeah, yeah, I like it. And
So
yeah,
what do we got for the bottom line for this week?
that's a good question, right? Because we talked about a few different things. Was there an underlying theme or message that we can tie these things together with?
Hmm.
Obviously, we talked
Not
about transparency.
I was thinking that, yeah, transparency seems to be like a thread, at least between, or it could be linked between the alleged spy
Right,
and being
right.
connected in our government. Transparency would definitely help in that regard, maybe to scrutinize who's working in their government, what kind of connections they have, what kind of influence they might have, as well as what's happening here with the employers and what kind of treatment they're doing of workers. So maybe some,
Yeah.
having this data, having this transparency can be very helpful for protections for citizens and workers.
And knowing where your numbers come from
Yeah.
is transparent. Yeah.
Transparency in your, yeah, in your numbers
Your mathing.
background.
Make sure the mathing
Yeah.
is mathing. So,
Right, right. And I think,
I agree.
I think it's
Yeah,
important to know
yeah.
that can be important to know to combat some of this bigotry or prejudice that people might have. Like, listen, it's not so, it's a different culture. There may be different people, but there's not so much of a disconnect there. We
Right,
use
right.
Arabic numbers. We have algebra comes from the
Yeah,
community,
yeah.
which might not be a good one because everyone hates algebra, but still, I mean, we learned a lot from the Arabic culture that
Mhm.
we use in the West. And even some of our founding fathers looked upon those scholars with reverence for
Sure.
the knowledge and information that they shared,
Yeah.
So, you know, I think it's good to know these things.
So basically, listen to Nas's "I Can" in the third verse in particular,
Why the third verse in particular?
because that's when he goes through a whole history of the world and talks about how a lot of this ancient knowledge comes from these cultures.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. We have a lot of that stuff that we might not realize or people don't realize, but knowing that
Right.
is helpful to combat these types of prejudices. And that's why teaching history, teaching things like, Black history or Asian history in America, Asian American history, Black American history, Native American history, it sets up that knowledge base so like, okay, everyone contributed here. It wasn't just one group, so you don't have that entitlement, you don't have that prejudice there. So I think that information is important.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So there you go. That sounds like a bottom line to me. More transparency. Let's shine that light, right? Keep shining that light and equipping people with knowledge. Knowledge is power.
Absolutely, absolutely. So
Oh,
where can
and
they find us then?
right before we
Oh,
do that, if you are a private employer that engages in these unscrupulous activities, you wait for it, get the rubber chicken of the week.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
yes, they can find us everywhere. Podcasts can be heard, as well as on Facebook Live every Tuesday around 7 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time. We go live on Facebook, so check us out there at Real Mike Scala, and get the audio pushed to your device if you are into podcasts. We're on all podcast networks. We're on Instagram at Nuance Show and YouTube with Nuance with Mike Scala and Jay Carter. Right?
Sounds good.
Yeah. So as always, we've got work to do. We'll catch you next time.